It is a story that has stuck with me since I first read it, and if you like stories with a bit of a bite, then today's podcast is for you. We discuss religion, politics, philosophy, science, history, current events, culture, media. Everything really. Welcome to the show. Let's start our show. Let's get into it. If you enjoy our discussions and want to support us so we can keep making these videos, become a member through the link in the description. If you don't want to support us financially, just engaging with our content goes a long way. Every like and comment helps us out, so thank you guys so much for doing that. Also, let's get into it. We talked last week about Gender General, which was fascinating because there's such an intersection between religious and sexual repression. I think that came up, as we sort of discussed in that episode, the idea of the witch craze being born out of the fact that women suddenly had agency over their own bodies and minds, which terrified people. But today's story follows along the same lines of taking away female sexuality and female body autonomy and putting it into the hands of men. The story comes from the podcast, which is a storytelling podcast that explores historical events from the perspective of those affected by them. Now, the story is set in the year 1473 in a fictional kingdom called Valencia. Valencia seems to be based off of Valencia in Spain. And the timeline checks out. Valencia was a powerful Christian kingdom in the late Middle Ages, but the story takes place in a fictional town called Greifen within this kingdom, and the story begins with a girl named Lysandra. Lysandra is a 16-year-old girl living in the hamlet of Greifen. Her mother died giving birth to her. Her father is a coupe, meaning makes barrels. One day, Lysandra meets a young man named Lauren, who plays a lyre. They meet in the garden of a monastery, and set to fall in love, but their relationship is forbidden. The people of Valencia had very strict rules about sex before marriage, and because this story is obviously rooted in religious zealotry, they could be accused of sinning together. Now, unfortunately, the details of the relationship aren't explored very far in the podcast. In all honesty, I would have loved for the story to explore the relationship a lot more, especially the way that Lauren is described. Someone who has soft hands that aren't used to killing. That implies that he was probably sheltered. He was probably not allowed to do any physical labor because his hands were too precious. So how did he survive? WHO took care of him. How did he meet Lysandra? All of these things that they didn't really explore, and I wish they did. But nevertheless, their relationship continues, and eventually rumors begin to spread that they're sleeping together. Now, the thing about this rumor is that it isn't clear if they are actually sleeping together or if the rumor is spreading simply because they've been seen talking to each other. But either way, it doesn't matter because their fates are still going to be sealed by the end of the story. Eventually, Lysandra is taken by a group of friars in the dead of night. She's taken to the sanctum of Saint Ian, also known as the Hall of the Black Triumph. Now, in the story, it says that the triumph was once white, but has since been stained black by the judgment it's witnessed. Inside the Hall of the Black Triumph, there is a tribunal of men dressed in black robes. They call themselves the Custodes Puritatis, or the Keepers of Purity. But those WHO speaking harsh voices refer to them as the judges of the womb. These men were responsible for maintaining the sanctity of Valencia, and to do that, they judged the women of the city for any sign of promiscuity. When Lysandra dies, she is brought before the High Examine. Father Malrixes are described as the stillness of a blade before striking. They're cold and calculating. Without wasting any time, Father Malric brings forward the instruments that will be used to judge Lysandra's purity. He uses hooks and calipers, devices designed to match her body. He uses a vice carved from ash wood. And finally, he brings forward the device that will determine Lysandra's fate. The Cradle of Setanti. The Cradle of Setanti is a metal instrument that resembles a throne of thorns. On the girl is placed upon it, her legs are spread open and secured with shackles. The examiner then uses a tool called Serad of Sanctity, a thin bone one that has been blessed by the church, to check her for what they call the field divine. According to church doctrine, every girl is born with a seal of flesh that serves as proof of their virginity. However, the hymen does not always remain intact, and sometimes a girl may bleed even if she hasn't slept with anyone. Serad of Sanctity is meant to detect these inconsistencies, but it's really just a tool of oppression that allows men to police women's bodies. Now, Lysandra is subjected to this procedure. Her body is covered in oil and the rod is inserted into her. Unfortunately, the story doesn't go into detail about what happens next. It's left to the listener's imagination. But we know that Lysandra is judged guilty of impurity, and the punishment for being impure was to spend 7 days in the so-called chamber of reflection, a small room in the sanctum lined with spikes of salt and glass. While in the chamber, Lysandra would fast and pray until she was cleansed of her sins, to make sure she didn't speak the words of temptation. Her tongue was pierced with iron, her hair was shorn to remove vanity. And on the octavo day, she would walk the path of redemption, a path made of salt and glass that led out of the city. However, after the 7th night, something strange happens. Father Morlock visits her in her chamber alone. He brings now instruments of torture with him. But instead a mirror. And what happens next is never recorded, but it's implied that Father Malric rapes her. In the morning, the friars found Father Malric in his study. He had killed himself by stuffing pages from the Book of Sanctity into his mouth. And somewhere around here, Lysandra disappears. Now, later in the story, some claim that she drowned herself in the river, others claim that she ran away and joined the spirits in the wailing forest. But according to the old women, Lysandra still walks the streets of Valencia at night. They say she wears the traditional clothes of a girl who's been judged impure. And instead of a lyre, she carries the spine of a man with her. She sings songs of justice for women who have been silenced, and she tortures those who listen to her with visions of their own shame. So overall, this was a good story. It wasn't amazing, but it was good. I liked the premise of it, and in which they had developed the relationship between Lorraine and Lysandra a little bit more. I also wish they had followed up with the ending. Like, what happened to the Cradle after this? Did they get rid of it? Is it still there? Is it still being used? What happened to the dead judges? What about the town that they lived in? What was the reaction to the disappearance of Lysandra? Was the town ever held accountable for what they did to Lysandra and the other women? All of these questions were left unanswered. But nonetheless, it was a good story. I hope you guys enjoyed our discussion. If you did, please leave us a like and a comment. And remember to tune in next week for a new episode. Also, we've got merch. This world has its own punishments, its own maze. The early record of refuse and drag right, but it had on the code with left. Children had chased each other here, raced games of hide and seek, and breaked up backhands and pat battles. Now only the ghosts of joy remain, or perhaps they'd been and gone, along with everything good. Valentia had been built on hope, from the start. Settlers had guns seeking a new life. Now they eyed as refugees, fleeing ruin and war, and what hope they brought died in the gutters, drowned in the canals, or choked on ash. When the rain returned to Valencia, it did not cleanse, it carved. The gutters ran thick with rat from the previous winter, and rats feasted in alleys where children on the played, and the people stayed indoors. Huddled their own dying fires, listening to the endless drumming of what and do Spain wine. Fear was their only company now. It clung to them as they skated about their business, beady-eyed and silent. No one wanted to risk becoming its prey, and yet amidst the decay, the custodes puritatis strengthened their hold. They fed on fear as wolves feed on lambs. 3 months ago, Lysandra had disappeared. The case was still open. Unsolved. Nobody had been recovered. Her silence had unsettled them. Her disappearance, more than any scream, had become a question they could not answer. And so in quest of virtue was born. It started with a whisper campaign, then widened to include every men heard in the city. The custodes puritatis, keepers of virtue, believed that demons had come to Valentia with sirens, and they sought to purge the city of sin and filth, starting with a source. Women debe maiden above the age of 13 winters would undergo their rite of confirmation before betrothal. It was no longer enough to be innocent. One had to prove it. The rite itself was cloaked in ceremony. At dawn, each maiden was to present herself at the Hall of Echoes. She would be anointed with sanctified ash, made to confess her sins to Saint Diana's statue. And finally be examined by the sisters of the Iron Veil. The sisters were women sworn to the order of the custodes puritatis, former wives and widows who had sent their names to dedicate themselves to the pesot of virtue. Their habits were studied in stark contrasts, by wimples framing faces drained of color, veils of iron grey concealing eyes that glinted like steel, and drawses of tarnished silver clasped between the bony fingers of gnarled hands. Today, the sisters wore crimson accents, a splash of color against their mana-crowned habits. They carried knives, some were long and slender, like a priestess carrying an offertory knife, others were short and stout, fit for skinning game, but always sanctified by prayer and polished by use. And those that knew the sisters best kept their gaze away from the blades, for the tools of confession were sharpest of all. Daphnia had joined the order almost 15 years ago. Her fellow recruits had come from all over Blandia, running from unwanted pregnancies. Inconvenient liaisons. Or husbands that beat them for small as misdeed. Daphnia had been defiant. She had been found naked in a field of crows after her village was raised by raiders. Her silence had impressed the high matron. Her scars had delighted her, and Daphnia served without question, her hands steady, her voice calm, something inside her, something buried, had begun to stir since the day she prepared the cradle for Lysandra. The jealous eyes had haunted her, not the pain in them, but the absence of it, the defiance. It lingered like a splinter in Daphnia's soul, poison in the piece she once pretended to possess. Now, as Daphnia led the procession up sisters toward the hall of echoes, she counted the days until she, too, could walk free of the order. Each rite followed the same structure. The maiden would be anointed with sanctified ash, made to confess to Saint Diana's statue, and finally examined by the sisters. The examination was a cold, matada calafer. If the hymen be intact or appeared to be, she would be marked with a white brand, a small crescent behind the ear. But its suspicion else if the maiden flinched too quickly. Bled too little, cried too loud, the brand turned black. Black meant unclean. Black meant exile or worse. The black brands were increasing. That morning, Daphnia was tasked preparing the chamber of the fifth oath. She found the girl there already kneeling, bound and gagged. Her name was Elira. She was 14, small, pale. Her wrists bore the bruises of struggle, but her mouth had not opened since the east. The guards joked she had the devil executed. Daphnia saw something else. Something familiar. As Cyril was made to kneel, her gown removed, the sisters began their grim task. When the sanctified knife approached, however, the girl did not cry out. She left. It was a sound that cracked the ceremony like the true stained glass. The matron struck her heart, blood trickled from Elira's lip, and still she smiled. Your veil, she whispered, is soaked in filth. The matron snarled, silence the child. The sisters dragged Elira away. Moments later, they returned, their faces grim, unclean, one of them said, holding up the bloodied knife, she left that goddess a grace. It was enough. The brand was bent black against her neck, and Elira was taken to the pit of penitence, a cavern beneath the sanctum where the impure was said to be reformed through isolation, fasting, and prayer screamed into stone. Few ever returned. Those WHO did walk with broken backs and deaths that stared through walls. That night, Daphnia stood before the mirror in her cell. Her affliction stared back at her. Second the light gathered, throwing the room into shadows, making it difficult to see anything clearly. Her face went before her eyes, shifting and changing like smoke. How long had it been since she looked into a mirror? How long since she had seen herself? Years. She looked away, unable to bear the sight of herself. Daphnia went to the archives. She broke the seal of the Book of Lost Names, a forbidden registry of all girls WHO had failed to write. It was an ancient book. Its pages filled with countless entries. First names, last names, ages, status, and purity. The ink had faded with time, but some stains remained. Blood stains. She found her name on page 297. Below it, another name, Lysandra of Grayfen. Status, vanished during redemption. Suspicion of demonic influence. Purity, unconfirmed. Next to it, and its splash of crimson. Then another name, Elira of Black Hollow. Status transferred to pit. Suspect possession. And below it, a single word, unclean. The next entry was blank. The ink bottle beside it was still warm. She heard footsteps. The matron stood in the doorway, curious at ease as it the devil waters, she said softly. Daphnia did not reply. Her hands slipped beneath her robe and gripped the hidden shard of mirror she had stolen weeks before. It was the only piece of reflection she still trusted. The matron entered. Closing the door behind her, she advanced slowly, like dusk. You are not well, she said. You have begun to question, I began to remember, Daphne whispered. The matron raised her hand to strike. But this time Daphne moved fast. The sharp found the soft of the matron's throat. There was no scream. Only giggling, like prayer turned inside out. She felt no remorse, only relief. Daphne staggered back. Her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to kill anyone. All she wanted was the truth. And the mirror told her everything she needed to know. She couldn't save Elira. Not really. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. What she wanted to do was find herself. WHO was she? A product of trauma, a tool of oppression, or something more? Daphne didn't know the answer. But she knew where to find it. The gears of fate ground slowly, but surely, when the people of Valencia emerged from their homes, blinking at the gray sky. They found that the gates to the city were locked. barricades had been erected across a road leading out of town. And standing guard was the sisters of Sea and Bay, their faces grim. Their knives glinting in the weak sunlight, the inquest of which had begun. Let's talk about what just happened. Obviously, this is not your average creepy abandoned underground place because, well, there's a glowing mirror. But also, these characters have clearly been down here for a while. We know that there are other people down here because there are other names carved into the walls. There are other cells. And we know that they've been down here for a while because Daphne is starving, so that makes this sort of the second lay. The first being obviously the creepy abandoned underground place. Now, of course, the mirror is kind of the center of attention here. And I think it's fair to say that mirrors, reflections, seeing yourself, all those things are like inherently unsettling anyway, right? Because you don't know whether or not you're gonna see your face or see something else. But in addition to that, I mean, it's a mirror, right? And we know that mirrors can reflect whatever you want them to. Like if you put a camera up against it, you'll see the camera. If you put a person up against it, you'll see the person. And so when the mirror reflects the wound, that tells us a few things. One, it has agency. It's not just a passive reflective surface. It's actually doing something. It has some kind of power. Also, it seems to be female. And three, that wound is not necessarily physical. It's a reflection of their spirits, of their souls. The fact that it's shown as a wound suggests that these people have been hurt. But the nature of that hurt, whether it's physical or psychological, we don't know. There's also the idea of the mirror showing them who they really are. When you look in a mirror, you see your appearance. You see your face, but maybe underneath the makeup, underneath the costume. You might see who you really are, especially considering that later on. It's described as showing the truth. And then Sevichan shows the truth of this place. Also the shape of the mirror. It's tall and narrow, which brings us to our next location, the church. We've seen churches depicted in dreamscapes before, and they tend to be places where people go to confess their sins. But also places where people go to hide their secrets. This church is both. It's both the house of prayer and the place of hiding. And the confession is interesting because Daphne's sin is that she doesn't know why she gets there. She doesn't know why she's confessing. Which is very interesting. And then the description of the church itself is obviously unsettling. Sisters are long and dark and they seem endless. The number of steps is unknown. But the most disturbing part is that they are stick with a baby breath. That tells us two things. One, that the space is close, right? There's not enough oxygen down here. And also, it seems to have a consciousness of its own. It disapproves of intruders. And that's a theme that carries throughout this location. You have the arches that are filled with prayers that the letters have crumbled from. Those prayers are no longer there. You have cell coves lined with chains, worn from recent flesh. And then there's a gate of the pit, which is ajar, which suggests that someone or something is coming through. And then the smell is also very important, sweat. Bile and rotting flowers. Bile is disgusting, right? It's something that comes out of your body. It's yellow. Flowers rotting implies death. So we've got a lot of sick imagery going on here. And then we get to the actual pit of penitence, which is like another lay. It's an extra special, extra creepy abandoned underground place. And again, there's a lot of sensory detail here. You've got the bells echoing above. You've got the sound of your own blood. You've got the sight of the cells, some marked with a red cross. Others with a black moon. And then you hear the sounds within them. There are saps, there are whispers, there is the sound of nails and stone. And then finally, you see her. At first, she's sitting with her back to the wall, closed arms wrapped on her knees. There's no dialogue for a bit, right? She doesn't speak. But then she says, Inuyut Kome, which tells us that she knows something that Daphne does not. She's expecting Daphne. And then when she opens her eyes, they glow faintly. And the description of her eyes is important because it doesn't say that they glow naturally. They glow with something ancient, with clarity. Born of pain. And then we get to the point where the story really starts to turn. When Daphne asks her she knows something, Sensei she gave it to me, which she assumes means Lysandra. Then we get the flashback to the right, we see the girls holding hands. And we don't see their faces. But we see the brains and their bodies. And then there's the music. The tune is the same one that Lysandra used to hum. But it's played backwards. And the explanation of the flashbacks is also very important because it's not just a flashback. She doesn't remember this. She experienced this. And the fact that it was played backwards is very important because we're experiencing it forwards, right? So that could suggest that the memories are being manipulated. It could suggest that the past is not as clear as we think it is. It could suggest that the order of events is not what they seem. And then she explains what the rite was. Before men took it and twisted it, it was a ceremony between women, a covenant of protectors, midwives, not executioners, keepers, not judges. And then they were banned, all of them. And then Daphne sees it again, but this time she experiences it, right? She's a part of it. She's not just seeing it. And that's a really big moment because finally we start to see the power of this place. We start to understand why it's important. Finally, the scene changes again. And they're running. They're trying to escape. And we don't know why exactly they're escaping. We know that the sanctum is coming for them. But we don't know what the plan is. Are they trying to destroy the mirror? Are they trying to undo the right? Are they trying to bring it back? We don't know. And that leads us to the final location, which is again another lay. Remember, the first lay was abandoned underground place. The second lay was a pit of penitence. The third lay is in the most sanctum. It's the root of the whole thing. And it's described as having a different atmosphere altogether. There's no sigils here. There's no bones. Instead, there's claw marks. The walls sweep water. There's no inscriptions here. There's no prayers. And instead of the familiar shapes, we have unfamiliar ones, right? We have claws. We have bone. We have blood. We have different senses. Instead of seeing visions, you have visions. Instead of touch, you have hearing. You can't really see anything. You can only see darkness. And in the darkness, there's a mirror. And this mirror is the heart of the whole thing, right? It's the thing that they're trying to protect. And it doesn't reflect your appearance. It reflects your essence. It reflects who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly. Everything, it's not a judgment. It's a reflection. And again, it shows them the truth. The truth of what? Well, that's not revealed. And then we get the vision of the spiral. And that spiral is important because it's a difference between the two rites, right? The vision shows the original rite. The one that was practiced before men came and kept it. And that's the end of the scene, which means we have a lot of questions, right? What does the mirror do? Why is it important? How do they use it? Why are they trying to bring the right back? Why were they imprisoned in the first place? And the problem is that we don't get answers to any of those questions. And I think that's intentional. I think it's part of the horror. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's real. We don't know what's fake. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to happen next. And that uncertainty, that lack of closure, that's what makes it scary. This is the story of Daphne, the key Medon, clad in iron and scripture. Se custodes puritatis descended into the low sanctum like a plague of locusts. Their veins bore the crescent of control. And their chants, on the sacred, now trembled with desperation. They feared not Elira, not Daphne, but the mirror, the one that refused to close. Above ground, the bells tolled re, in Valentia's squares. Smoke rose from the spires of Saint Anne's cathedral as the order prepared to cleanse what they called heresy of the womb. They had lost control of fear, and so they weaponized it. But below, in the stone-choked veins of the earth, something far old had awakened. Daphne stood before the mirror, as hollow but unblinking. The visions had not ceased. Faces continued to emerge, some weeping, some silent. Some left in true blood, all women, all taken, and each one stared at her with a singular message, "You are celeste." Elira knelt beside a broken altar of bone and moss, in her hands. She held a relic, neither cross nor blade, but a kept shard of obsidian marked with spiral runes. Celestial of the first rite. It pulsed in her palms, alive with memory. They had breached a threshold within minutes, she whispered. Daphne didn't answer. Her heart had gone quiet. But not that. Instead, it listened. Not for escape, but for instruction. Above them, both standed. Still met stone. Shouts echoed like thunder in the ribcage of the deep. The custodes were coming. And they would not ask questions. They would not listen to the old songs. They would bend them. Elira turned. It has to be now. Daphne stepped forward and placed her blood-stained hand against the mirror. Elira did the same. Flesh touched memory. Warmth met wound, and the mirror opened. It did not shatter. It did not glow. It simply folded inward, like a breath held for centuries now exhaled, and drew it for them, not ghosts, not spirits, but echoes, the reflections of a veil broken on the cradle. Their pain had not died, it had become shape. Their screams had not vanished. They had become chorus. From the dark emerged Lysandra. Her feet left no sound. Her gown flowed like oil across water. And in her hands she carried the lyre, not carved out wood or string, but bone. Its melody was silent. Yet the stone wept. Daphne fell to her knees. You came back, she whispered. Lysandra did not speak. She walked to the altar and placed the lyre upon it. Then, raising her pale fingers, she touched Daphne's brow. It was never gone. Suddenly, memory returned not as fragments, but as flood. Daphne saw the truth behind centuries of doctrine. The first right had not been a myth, it had been stolen. Women were the guardians of blood and death, protectors of the veil not as prison, but as promise. They chose when to break, chose when to share. And for that, they were hunted, renamed impure, and made silent. Until now. The first custodes broke through the chamber gate. They paused, not in fear, but confusion. The air was thick, not with smoke, but with presence. The mirror pulsed, the altar bled light, and from every crack in the walls, the faces emerged. The dead had come to bear witness. Elira stood. So many years, she said calmly. We were told we bled wrong. She raised the obsidian shard. So now let us bleed right. She slashed her palm and pressed it to the altar. The stone drank deep. Daphne followed. Their blood mingled, not a sacrifice, but of pain. The mirror screamed, or perhaps it sang. Either way, the custodes fell back. But it was too late. The chamber erupted, not in fire, but in sound. A chorus of broken hymns, broken notes, broken names. The spirits of the taken swarmed through the mirror like ink through water. They touched no one, yet every man screamed as though flayed. The custodes clutched their ears. Their loins, every part they had claimed dominion over now turned against them. One by one, they dropped. Some fled, some fell, none spoke again. And when silence returned, it was not empty. It was holy. Elira collapsed. Daphne cut her, cradling her like a sister lost and found. Lysandra approached, and for a moment, the three stood in a triangle older than fate. This place cannot remain, Lysandra whispered not aloud, but inside them. And so, they destroyed it, with a shard. They carved into the mirror a final spiral. The chamber groaned, stone wept. The mirror cracked, not with shete, but with release. And slowly, gently, the walls collapsed inward, entombing the cradle, the brands, the pain. Above, Valentia woke to the silence of bells no longer tolled. The order collapsed within the week. Mothers refused to present their daughters. The sanctum was bent, not by riots, but by the sisters themselves. Those WHO remembered what it meant to protect, not punish. No one knows what became of Daphne or Elira. Some say they work still. Of Inseritas it once was. Others claim they became stars. But in every village where daughters once feared of light, now they get on moonless nights and hum an old song soft, slow. In a language of blood and memory, the light is gone, but the melody remains, and purity, at last, is no longer pain. You know what you're thinking. What? That's the end? That's it? And to the tea bullshit? There is always more to tell, more to know. This wealth, this history, these characters, they don't belong to me. They belong to all of us. So if you want more, if you want to see what happens next, if you want to take a piece of this magic home with you, then the tools are in your hands. You had that right. Our world is made up stories and you have the power to change it.